Hello, welcome to our Wednesday edition of Bible Babble. It is Wild Card Wednesday, so we could talk about basically anything in the Bible. So today, we're going to go back to the Old Testament, and we're going to talk about something I don't think I've talked about really, other than kind of mentioning it in passing. Something we don't often actually talk about that much in church. It's the tabernacle. The tabernacle of the Israelites. And you might very well say, what's the tabernacle? Is that where they had the choir? The answer is no. The tabernacle is something that God, through Moses, ordered the people, the children of Israel, to construct. And the reason they constructed it is this. They wanted to have, because if you remember we had talked previously, that God was to go with them. God was to be present with them as they traveled this long journey back to Canaan, to the Promised Land. And basically God, and I'll paraphrase a bit, God, when God was on Mount Sinai, said, all right, look, I'll travel with you, but I need to have an appropriate way to travel. If I'm going to be with you in the wilderness, certain things are going to have to be done. And beginning in Exodus 27, and for like 4 or 5 chapters after that, and then it comes up again in slightly different form. God tells the Israelites what he needs in order to travel with them. So when you think tabernacle, you can think of it sort of like a portable temple, which is actually the way, is from the Israelite standpoint, that's probably a pretty good way to think of it. You might also think of it, as something like this. Sort of a mobile home for God. Because it's the way the presence of God traveled with the Israelites. And as everything else was in Exodus, or at least everything how it seemed to be, God was really, really specific about how this tabernacle was to be built. And remember, essentially, because they were on the move, not like they were walking every day, but because they would plant themselves here for a little bit, then they would get up and they would migrate, they would move to another place and stay there a little bit, and then they go to somewhere else. So they were constantly, they weren't putting down roots, let's put it that way. So this tabernacle, at this point in their existence, couldn't be a solid, permanent structure. There was not going to be any putting down a foundation and hauling in massive stone blocks to be used to construct this thing. It was a tent, basically, surrounded by a collapsible fabric wall. Now, that doesn't do it justice. We'll talk about that in a second. But I just want to show you the construction. So basically, what God wanted was to build a courtyard And this was that collapsible wall that I talked about. And then in the courtyard, there was an altar. And then a kind of like a water, kind of like a sink, a very fancy sink that the priests would wash their hands in before they were going to perform a sacrifice or do something else in the holy area here. And then at one end of the, and this is not to scale, at one end of the tabernacle they had the sacred space. You know, the outer wall kind of kept the dust and the animals and the riffraff out. Israelites could assemble here in the courtyard, but then here was the holy place. And then here, separated by a curtain, was the really holy place. What would one day be known as the Holy of Holies. And that's all backwards, but it doesn't really matter. H, can't do it backwards H. Okay, so this is the general shape. Like I said, it's not to scale. And this thing, the holy place, that was like a big tent. A really big tent. I mean, the poles for that thing, the supports for it, were 15 feet tall. But let me just give you an idea of the detail. This is from Exodus 27. This is the beginning of the chapter. Build an altar of acacia wood, 3 cubits high. It is to be square, 5 cubits long, 5 cubits wide. Make a horn at each of the 4 corners, so that the horns and the altar are of one piece, and overlay the altar with bronze. Make all its utensils of bronze, its pot to remove the ashes, and its shovels, sprinkling bowls, meat forks, and fire pans. Kind of sounds like a barbecue. Make a grating for it, a bronze network, and make a bronze ring at each of the 4 corners of the network. Put it under the ledge of the altar so that it is halfway up the altar. Make poles of acacia wood for the altar and overlay them with bronze. The poles are to be inserted into the rings so that they will be on 2 sides of the altar when it is carried. Make the altar hollow out of boards. It is to be made just as you were shown on the mountain. So 2 things there. As barbecue grills go, and of course it's sacred, it's more than a barbecue grill, but it was big. It was 5 cubits on a side. A cubit is an ancient form of measurement. It's about a foot and a half. It's meant to be the space from your elbow, or the length from your elbow to the tip of your middle finger. We think of it today as about 18 inches. In those days, people were a little shorter. Maybe it was a little bit less than that. And of course, somewhere they had to have a precise measurement, because you couldn't always just depend on everybody's elbow to middle finger being the same length. But neither here nor there. But it's 5 of those, so it's 7.5 feet on a side. It's a square. And then it is 3 cubits high, so 4.5 feet. So this is a pretty big object. And it's made out of wood, but then it's overlaid with bronze. So it's a heavy thing. That's why God commanded that you also had to have these rings put on it, so that you could put poles through it. Of course, the poles were heavy too. And then it could be carried by whoever was lucky enough to carry it from place to place. And that's just the sort of detail that went into this. And as far as the scale goes, well, let me just show you. I was going to construct a model. It was going to be cardboard. So it was going to be, nothing that fancy. But I was going to construct a model of kind of what the tabernacle looked like. And then I thought, hey, you know what? It's the internet, age of the internet. So I don't have to construct a model to show you. I can actually just show you. So, a bit of detail first. Remember the Holy of Holies? This is from the drawing. Hope you can see it. The Holy of Holies was not just an empty tent. Because what you had in there was the Ark of the Covenant. So you had this sort of structure like this veil down the middle, and then you had the Ark of the Covenant in here. And then out here, you had another altar. And in here, you had a table. Oops, sorry. Here you had a table, and here you had a lampstand, or a candle stand. There were 7 candles, or lamps, that were always lit. And then on the table, which was down here, every Sabbath day, priests would put 12 loaves of bread on that table. It's called showbread. And that would stay there for an entire week as an offering of bread. It also showed that God provided for them. And, side note, at the end of that week, the bread was still good, and the priests got to eat it. If you've ever been around when we have Holy Communion, and after communion is done, worship is done, sometimes you get to eat the bread that's left over, so it's delicious. And like I said, then in this Holy of Holies, there's the Ark of the Covenant, and that carried, or contained, the second set of 10 Commandments, because the first one got smashed. And it contained the staff of Aaron, which we're told had begun to bud and grow almonds. And it was carved in such a way that there were cherubs on each side of the top, overlaid, all of this overlaid with gold, of course. And that was said to be the place where God sat when God came and hung out. So, very important. It also contained whatever it was that melted everybody's face in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but they don't mention that. So, that's the general layout of it. As I said, I was going to build you a model, and then I realized, hey, it's the internet. We don't have to do it. Somebody has. This is an actual model that was built at a park in Israel. It gives you an idea of what it looked like. Ooh, and look, I think that might be God's presence. Now, actually, that's a window glare, but... So this thing was huge. You don't get a good feel for it. I think this was a scale model. I don't believe it was the actual size. Because when you look at what the actual size was, it was 150 feet long and about 75 feet wide. Now, just to give you a sense, just throwing the number out there doesn't exactly give you a sense, but basically, if you take a football field and run a line down the middle of it, and then a line, lengthwise down the middle, and then a line across the middle, 50-yard line, this, you divide it into quarters. This tabernacle would take up an entire quarter of an American football field. That's pretty big stuff. And this is what they picked up. First they built it, and then whenever they moved anywhere in the wilderness, they would pick it up and carry it with them. This is the place in their culture where God was with them. It was, if they needed one, they wanted to have one, it was a physical location for the presence of God. So it was extremely important. Now, a couple things. Eventually, of course, they came to the land of Canaan. And eventually, they had a king, King David, who had a son named Solomon. That's connected to all of this because until the time of King David, the tabernacle was taken from one of several different sacred places in Israel. And it would stay here for a while, then it would be moved here, then it would move here. And finally, David basically said, enough of this nonsense. It's coming to where I want it. It's going to stay there. And it did. Now, Solomon, David's son, wanted something better than this. So he basically formed a tabernacle out of stone. That was the first temple. It was built in Jerusalem, built on Mount Moriah, which is believed to be the same mount, same high place that Isaac was taken by Abraham when Abraham was supposed to, was told to sacrifice him. So, sacred place. Solomon builds this stone replica, full size, of the tabernacle, complete with this massive Holy of Holies, and the lampstands, the Ten Commandments, tablets of the commandments, Aaron's staff, all of those go into the Holy of Holies. And it's a beautiful structure. And that was finished in about 957 BC. So, at the least, this tabernacle that we're talking about, the original one, lasted about 300 years. Maybe 4 or 5, depending upon when the Exodus happened. We talked a little bit about that last week when we talked about dating in the Bible. So the original tabernacle lasted several hundred years. The first temple was built in 957. And then it was destroyed eventually by the Babylonians. The second temple was built in 512 BC. And then from 20 BC to 26 AD, it was rebuilt and expanded into this huge and glorious structure that was the temple that Jesus was familiar with. So there's this direct, line of connection from the tabernacle in the wilderness to the temple in Jerusalem. And over that whole time, it was believed that that was the place, the Holy of Holies within the tabernacle and then within the temple, was the place where God resided when God was here on earth. And it was a very, very meaningful place to the children of Israel. So when it was again destroyed by the Romans in about 70 AD, it was a tremendous blow. And it's never been rebuilt since. Probably never will be. So, that's a little history of the tabernacle. Hope you found it interesting. So we're done for the day. We ran long again. So, hope to see you online this Sunday for worship. Once again, we are doing virtual worship only due to the COVID situation. And in the meantime, I hope you stay healthy and safe and have a great evening and rest of the week. See you next week.